All right, we'll get started. Just get all my ducks in a row here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Undocumented Migration Project webinar, where we talk about things related to immigration, migration, borders, human rights, and art. We are incredibly excited to have with us today Amy Knight and Tony Banegas, who I will introduce in a few moments, and will be taking part in our conversation. I first want to introduce myself. My name is Jason De León. I am Executive Director of the Undocumented Migration Project, and I am also Professor of Anthropology and Chicano and Central American Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. The Undocumented Migration Project is a long-term anthropological research endeavor, research/education/arts collective that is focused on documenting, understanding, and raising awareness about the experiences of migrants leaving Latin America and attempting to enter the United States. Much of our work at the moment revolves around the Sonora Desert of Arizona, where since the mid-1990s, the Border Patrol has employed a strategy known as prevention through deterrence. And it is a strategy that attempts to use the natural environment as a physical barrier to the movement of undocumented migration. And so the basic logic of this policy is that if we can funnel people away from urban ports of entry, places like San Ysidro, California, El Paso, Texas, that we can push them out into a place like the Sonora Desert, where migrants will then have to walk upwards of 60 or 70 miles, multiple days across a rugged and difficult landscape. And the idea is that if you have to walk across this landscape, that you will be deterred by extreme temperatures, rattlesnakes, mountains, and everything else that nature can throw at you. This policy has been in place since 1994, so under the Clinton administration, and it has been the direct cause of the deaths of thousands of migrants in Arizona alone. Prevention through deterrence has been employed elsewhere, more recently in South Texas, where migrant deaths have been on the rise for the last 10 years. But we're going to talk mostly today about things that have been going on in southern Arizona for the last 2 decades. So that being said, I want to introduce my two guests and friends. It's really wonderful when you're able to combine, to collaborate with folks that you know well and that you've had a good time with in social settings. So it's my pleasure to have Amy Knight and Tony Banegas with us here today. Amy Knight is an attorney based in Tucson, Arizona. Her practice is focused on human rights issues, including the defense of people facing the death penalty, defense of those charged with crimes for engaging in humanitarian work, and challenging harmful and unjust policies. Amy is also a trained writer and published novelist, and uses these skills to make her clients' stories real for judges, juries, and policymakers. She's a graduate of Vassar College, the University of Arizona, and Stanford Law School. Our other guest today is the brand new executive director of the Colibri Center for Human Rights, Tony Banegas. For those of you that don't know, the Colibri Center for Human Rights promotes healing and change by working with families of disappeared migrants to identify and honor those who have lost their lives on the U.S.-Mexico border. And I should just, to full disclosure, Amy and I both have sat on the Colibri Center for Human Rights board for many years together, and we're both directly involved in the hiring of Tony recently. So it's really excited to get everybody here together for this conversation. Tony Banegas has served as the honorary consul of Honduras in Arizona from 2006 until 2016. In that role, he was the primary contact for Hondurans facing challenges along the border and in immigration detention centers and the judicial system. He earned a master's in public administration and a bachelor's in business administration, both from Arizona State University. So we're really excited to have both of you here today. And as I said, one of the big reasons that I wanted to get you here together was because of our shared connection with Colibri, but also because of the connection between the two of you in regards to working on human rights issues and working on issues on legal issues surrounding things like humanitarian care in the Arizona desert. And we are living in this moment, in this current political moment, where it's clear that both the desert and the legal system is being weaponized against both citizens and non-citizens. And so I'm super excited to have you both here today. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask Tony a question first to give us a little bit of background on his work, and then we will. And then I'll ask Amy a related question, and then we'll open it up to a dialogue. And for those of you who are watching on Facebook, please feel free to submit your questions at any time during this conversation. We will be monitoring those questions and incorporating them into our conversation. Okay, so Tony, I guess we'll start with you. And for our audience, I guess the two big questions that they have likely is, number one, what is it that Colibri does? And two, why is it that American citizens should care about the work that you're doing?
Thank you. Well, again, first of all, I have to take this opportunity to thank you and Amy for bringing me to Colibri. I said it before, I'm not new to Colibri. I've known Colibri for a long time, and my role as a diplomat, I work with Colibri very close. And so now I'm really honored to be here. You said I'm brand new. I don't know if you can say that. I'm been here 3 months. I feel like a veteran now since July 1st. But no, I spend a lot of time learning about the work now more than ever. And to your question, you said the mission, which the board drafted in January. I worked with a lot of nonprofits for many years, and I love it because it's very short and to the point. I just like to start with that, healing, change, and honor. There's nothing more traumatic than to lose a loved one, especially in a faraway place where you don't speak the language, you don't know anything about the system. Change. We through our work, we're trying to point out some of the policies that you mentioned that are detrimental to the life of many people. So hopefully, with our work, we'll raise awareness to provide change. So we change these policies. And the big one for me is to honor those who died, lost their lives. I said, I don't care who you are, regardless of the legal status of any human being. There are the Geneva Convention, the UN, there are international treaties that speak about the dignity of human life. And that's at the core of Colibri, to honor those lives so they're not forgotten. So my job now that I'm here is to make sure that those numbers that we'll talk about later, how, unfortunately we keep finding remains on a daily basis, that those numbers they're not numbers that go over our head. Those are human beings that have a family, a community behind them where they left, who are still crying and yearning for, a dim light that they'll be found alive. So our work is, I tell people now that I talk to a lot of folks, it's kind of like a calling. It's a special work, and we know it. Our team knows that. We're very committed to our work, to work with families from all those countries where the families come from, to make sure that we find answers and help in a way to ease their pain and help them go through the process. So in a short, that's what we do, work with families with the system that we know well, and we can help them navigate the system. But again, the more important thing is to provide moral support to help them go through the process.
And so, could you maybe walk us through what a typical kind of case would be for Colibri?
So Colibri started again, like anything in life, I think Socrates said that, everything in life is started as an idea in somebody's mind. So we had our founders, Robin, Guy, and Reina, and Chelsea, I think 4 individuals who saw what was happening on the border, that they kept finding remains, especially in Pima County, Tucson. So what we do, we use scientific work. We use DNA. which is very reliable to identify remains. So we use, when someone is disappeared, we have a very robust website and a phone line where people can find a report of missing person. Today, I can tell you that we have collected almost 4,000, over 3,600 missing reports, with information, everything that we can get to help us identify the person. Then, of course, we take the DNA on family members, the closest family members, relatives, the more that we have. And then we work with a professional company out in the US to do the analysis and the forensic analysis. And then we provide, if there's a match, then we will contact the family. We'll stay in contact with the family throughout the process. But if there's it's a match, then we'll help families and work with the consulate, whoever else we need to work to either send a body if we have a body. A lot of times we don't have a body. We have bones, so we have remains. So we have ashes. So we help them through the process to send those remains home. In addition, we work with families, the family network. We have 5 chapters in New York, Oakland, Los Angeles, Tucson, and Phoenix. These are family members who have lost someone who is missing. So we work with those families to help them, one, to cope with the grief and provide answers to what they're going through. And again, it's in the support group for those families who are experiencing the same loss. So again, families are at the core of what we do. Really, we couldn't do anything without the families. So that's why we have a reputation, because we are really honor and respect the families and everything that we do. And that's key in our work.
And one of the things, I think people don't know that thousands of people have died crossing the snow desert of Arizona, right? Over 3,200 recovered remains. And one of the things I think that's very surprising about this year is the number of cases that you guys have been dealing with. Could you just talk briefly about that?
Yeah, thank you. The numbers are staggering again, but this year, it's been a very unusual year because of COVID-19. So people thought that maybe that would deter a lot of folks that are coming up north to the U.S. But I can tell you right now, we are at the brink of breaking a 10-year-old record. In 2010, 220 bodies were found just here in Arizona. I'm just talking about Arizona. Now, you and I and Amy know, and people who are connected to us know that those numbers aren't accurate, right? This is our bodies that were found of remains. But we are right now nearly at 200, and we still have almost 2.5 months to go before the end of December. So unfortunately, it looks like we may break that 10-year-old record. So the COVID-19 did nothing to slow down the migration. And we can talk about, later if we have time more, because it's complex, as you know, why people do that. But they take the risk to come and risk their life. And but I just say that, a few years ago, I was working with a lot of unaccompanied minors, 10,000 children that came in a company. And people would ask me, the media all the time, why would people risk their life or the life of their families to come and put them in danger? And I'll say, let's reframe the question. Would I risk my life as a father I have 2 daughters, Sara and Sabrina, to provide for those 2 children? I would. So is a good mom, a good dad will risk their life to provide for their families, and they'll do that and do whatever they need to do to provide for their family. So this is a record year for the reason that you mentioned at the beginning. More people are dying, unfortunately. Texas, the number even higher than Arizona, California. So the numbers are just keep going up, unfortunately. So it's sad, and it's sad to see that even on this unusual year with COVID-19.
And so, Amy is I always look to Amy to figure out what I can do legally and not do. What can I do legally and illegally? What are the bounds there? And I think, and this is a question that I get quite often. So I just came back from Arivaca, Arizona, a couple of days ago, and one of the, I stayed at an Airbnb, and some of the instructions on the Airbnb were like, if someone comes to your door who's a migrant who needs help, these are the things, like, call the border patrol, don't put them in your car, don't let them use your phone, et cetera, et cetera. And I get a question oftentimes from, if I give a talk about these issues, people will say, well, how can I help? Can I go down there? Can I get involved? What are things that I can do to stop this whole process or to help save people? And of course we talk about you can donate money to organizations that are working on this issue. You can volunteer your time with certain organizations. But Amy, I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of this relationship that you see between migrant death in Arizona and other places, and how American citizens who are just have become really appalled by this and want to stop the situation, what that kind of looks like on the ground, and what your experiences have been with in dealing with that type of humanitarian work legally.
It is not a simple question, largely because there's no law that we have, either a state law or a federal law, that talks specifically about the provision of humanitarian aid. So in that sort of context, we're left with laws that were written for other reasons, with other things in mind, that govern people's actions here. And how those laws get interpreted, and whether they're interpreted to encompass actions that are humanitarian in nature, seems to vary. It's in the last 4 years or so, we've been seeing a real uptick in enforcement activity by the Border Patrol and other law enforcement agencies who are targeting humanitarian aid workers for prosecutions under laws that have nothing to do with humanitarian aid. So either sort of smuggling, immigration type laws, or we were actually seeing some charges brought under environmental regulations to do with volunteers who were driving into remote parts of the desert and leaving supplies for migrants, water, food, blankets. And that was construed as something basically like littering, abandonment of property. So the laws that are being used to prosecute these folks, it's sort of a creative application by the government there. I think it's not really what's contemplated by existing laws. It's not that easy to just say this is and this isn't legal, because as I mentioned, we don't have just a legal defense that draws a line that says if you're doing it for humanitarian purposes, it's not a crime. We just don't have that law. Tony mentioned some international treaties and international agreements and humanitarian principles, and those things exist and should guide our policy, but they're not binding on US law enforcement agencies and US courts. So, we can get up there. I, as a defense attorney defending a volunteer, can get up there and say, this action is under, this or that agreement or treaty, and the court kind of, well, that's not the law here. So it's very distressing, and I think volunteers and even just residents are somewhat vulnerable to, I don't know what to call them other than sort of whims of the agencies that are enforcing these things. I don't know sort of from what level in the hierarchy that is coming, whether it really comes from the local folks who have a bee in their bonnet, or whether it's a larger policy that's going on. I don't know. They don't tell us those sorts of things. But that's where we are.
And could you just talk a little bit about the Scott Warren case and give people a sense of kind of what this battle is looking like in the courtroom?
Sure. So Scott Warren is a volunteer. He lives down here in Southern Arizona, and he works largely with a group called No More Deaths. He also works with a group called Aho Samaritans. And what both of those groups do is they try to prevent people who are making that journey across the desert. And the reason they're making that journey across the desert is the policy that you identified earlier, Jason, prevention through deterrence. Scott and his colleagues in these groups try to prevent those people from dying. They do it in various ways. One of them is the one that I mentioned, where they go out in the desert and leave supplies for people. They also operate a camp with medical aid available, and people are able to recuperate, have some water, so that they are able to safely walk without as much of a risk of dying out there. So those groups work in the remote desert here in southern Arizona, doing those things. And in 2018, in the very beginning of 2018, there were some folks coming through, travelers, migrants, through one of the camps that they have. This one was actually primarily a camp for the volunteers. They wouldn't routinely house migrants there, but these two men who were traveling and had been walking through the desert came to the camp, and Scott Warren was sort of in charge at that time. And they stayed there for a couple of days. The volunteers gave them a medical evaluation. They had a nurse come in and look at them. And Border Patrol agents were conducting some surveillance on their camp. And they saw Scott Warren with these two men out in the yard. He was giving them some landmarks and orientation, so that when they continued walking, they wouldn't get terribly lost, and they would know how to get back to a road and get help if they were in trouble. The Border Patrol agents sitting on the hill across the way with binoculars interpret this as he's giving them directions for how to get around the checkpoint. And they come in and arrest him and the two migrants. And he ultimately is charged with, they called it harboring. It's basically a smuggling kind of provision. Their theory being more or less that he was helping these men evade the Border Patrol. And that's sort of what the reason that they were offering shelter was to assist them in getting away with it. So they brought this felony charge against him in federal court here in Tucson. And my colleague, Greg Kirkendall, who's a very experienced defense lawyer, took the case pro bono with his law firm. I was working there, so he brought me in to help with the case, and the two of us defended Scott against these felony charges. We went through a trial, and we got a hung jury. So we had 8 people vote to acquit and 4 people vote to convict him. And we had basically presented to this jury what was really going on there, that the group exists with these humanitarian aims and the protocols that they have and what kind of work they're doing. And so we got this split decision, and the prosecutors decided to try it again. So we did another trial on the same thing. We did a lot of lawyer stuff in between to try to make the second trial more fair and more reasonable. And that was successful. We had the second trial just about a year ago, and Scott was acquitted unanimously and quickly. So that's the Scott Warren case in a nutshell. That was a pretty big nutshell, I guess. But we're continuing to see Border Patrol sort of posturing that they might do this again. They don't seem terribly chastened by that loss. So we still have a lot of concern here in Tucson that that volunteers who are doing those sorts of things are potentially subject to this kind of prosecution, and they may ultimately win the defense. You know, it's not actually illegal maybe under these laws, but they would still have to go through this entire process. You know, when you're charged with a felony like that, you know, they take your passport. You have to check in and get permission to leave the state. I mean, it's no small thing. So there's still, the volunteers are still down there working. They're not deterred by this, but there's a lot of apprehension about that, I think.
And so, what is the like? What would be considered legal that you could, like? Let's say I'm in the desert, I encounter someone who needs help. What could I do that would be within the realm of legal to help them?
It's not black and white. You know, we probably would have thought before this started happening that just giving them a medical checkup and a place to sleep for the night was legal. That is not how the Border Patrol is interpreting this. But in terms of what's likely to be pretty safe and what are the things that sort of seem to be triggering them to get involved, transporting people in a car is off limits. Definitely shouldn't do that. Giving somebody a glass of water when you encounter them face to face is probably fine. We wouldn't see any problem with that. When we start to see problems is somebody comes inside, you keep them indoors where they're out of sight, they're hidden. Border Patrol driving by wouldn't know they were in there. You make arrangements for travel. Those things are problematic. Just giving somebody some food and water would probably be safe. But that's a probably. You know, we really can't predict how these agencies are going to continue to interpret their power. I mean, I think that they're angry. So what they will do is not necessarily what we would expect if we're just looking at these laws rationally.
And so, kind of maybe building on this issue of legality. I sort of want to ask Tony. I mean, I know that Colibri has issues with the work that you're doing because of the fact that the people that you are trying to help, right, are not U.S. citizens. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how the legal system, you have it on one end, and in terms of the humanitarian care, where it's trying to impede the giving of care to a non-U.S. citizen, and then the flip side of that is, what types of legal issues are you faced with while trying to help the families of the missing and of the deceased that relate to this issue of being non-citizens?
That's a great question, Jason, because if you think, you look at when the person makes a decision to come to the U.S., whether they're in Honduras or Guatemala, a lot of things happen when they decide to take that journey. So there are many touch points. They have to cross different countries, different boundaries, different systems. So to your point, when the family makes a report to us that a person is missing, that person has been in touch with a lot of different systems, whether it's Border Patrol, whether it's sheriffs or police, or someone maybe in another country. So it's a lot of information, a lot of touch points. And of course, we are very professionals. We listen to the families. We try to gather that information because that will help us to help the families. We have a very robust database, one of the biggest probably in the country, migrants who are they follow best practice to make sure that information is secure, safe, that no one has access to, that shouldn't have access to that, because what you just said, there are unfortunately people out there who will try to do anything to undermine our work. So we're very, very protective. Back to the point I made earlier with the families, because we have a rapport with those families. They trust us more than they trust, unfortunately, their own government in many cases. They don't trust the systems here. And so we are honored to have the trust and very and guarded. We work closely with the systems. I mentioned, this families come in contact with hospitals, either we're in a hospital for an injury or with the police. So we will be very professional when we're trying to elicit information from the systems, but at the same time, very respectful, and we will never compromise, the security or safety of the family that we work with, regardless of the status. Like I said before, Amy is an attorney, of course, can tell you, yes, if we are, have a subpoena or have a court order, of course, we have to comply with some of those, we have to do by law. But besides that, we do everything, we follow best practice to make sure that we protect the families throughout the process and help them to find answers while at the same time protecting their privacy and their rights.
And what do you think are the biggest constraints that Colibri faces right now in terms of like accomplishing your work?
So one of the challenges, takes resources, takes money to do anything. Right now, I mentioned earlier that we have almost 1,200 missing reports right now, remains that have not been identified. That's almost 1,200 that have not been identified. If we had the resources right now, we could be sending, DNA tests to the lab on a weekly basis. One of the things we do at Colibri, and maybe we'll talk later, we just launched a campaign, cuantos más, how many more people have to die. But up to now, we've been sending, we take the DNA samples and we send them on batches of 50 or more because we get a discount, $79 if we send 50 or more. But I already have done my homework. If we have one sample, I will send it tomorrow, it costs us $535. So that way we don't have to wait until we get, a large enough sample, and we don't have to wait any longer. So the resources, again, financial resources, this is a professional lab, so one of the best in the country, trained forensic, geneticists and all experts who write the report after a match has been, and when we have a match, it has to be written by a forensic specialist, but those cost money. So to your point, one of the challenges, COVID-19 has hit us hard, all of us, the nonprofit sector, a lot of uncertainty. So we've been trying to be very creative using social media to reach out to folks to let them know what's happening, and also to raise awareness, but also to raise funds so we could do more DNA analysis on a weekly basis. If we had the unlimited resources, we would be doing that on a weekly basis, daily basis, doing analysis and providing answers to families quicker, so they don't have to wait any longer.
And I will just want to say to our viewers that that if you're interested in learning about Colibri, you can go to their website, Colibri Center for Human Rights. You can donate directly. You can buy the Cuantos Mas T-shirt that's part of the current fundraiser, and all of those ways in which you can contribute will go directly towards helping this organization support these families. So people that are interested in that, we'll post that. Those links along with the videos when this stuff goes to the internet, but please check that out. And as I was saying the other day in our board meeting, those t-shirts will make great Christmas presents. They come in all sizes, so please take a look.
I couldn't let this opportunity go without saying that we have a $10,000 donation that we can use for matching grants. So everything that you donate, it will be matched up to $10,000, and we have another opportunity right now we're waiting for. So we have another 10,000, additional 10,000. So everything you donate will be matched. And our goal is to raise $50,000 between now and Thanksgiving. And again, if we have that extra funds, we'll be able to do more DNA testing and again, provide answers to families sooner rather than later. So.
Excellent. Well, I've got some questions here that are coming in from viewers, and also, but I want to ask maybe Amy this question. And Tony, also feel free to chime in here. I've had conversations, Amy, with people who have asked about whether or not there has been an interest a global interest or in bringing a case against the U.S. federal government about the death toll that's been related to prevention through deterrence, and the fact that you have this policy that knowingly puts people in harm's way, that's been shown to have a direct, that migrant death is not collateral damage. In some instances, it's been used in federal documents and listed as a potential way to measure the effectiveness of this policy. So, one, I guess, sort of from a legal standpoint, do you think that, like, into the future, if you could look into the future, that would you see that as a possibility of, potentially the U.S. government being tried by a place like The Hague for these, what people view as crimes against humanity, or maybe on a less kind of extreme example, do you think that there could be a moment where, like, a legal compulsion that the federal government would have to take more responsibility for these deaths that are directly linked to its own actions, right? Because at the moment, they're not supporting Colibri's work. They're not paying for these DNA samples or the collections of the comparative samples.
I think it's very unlikely that the United States government could be forced through a legal proceeding to change this policy. Even if there were a good mechanism, a treaty with a specific enforcement mechanism that could apply here, and the United States had agreed to submit to the jurisdiction of the court on that, in that area. When we get judgments from the international court, the United States often just kind of brushes them off. And the way that our domestic Supreme Court has responded to this is basically, in a lot of contexts, they say Congress would have to make a law that implemented those requirements in order for them to be enforced here. So that's a very complicated way of saying basically that I don't think international law would be an effective way of tackling this problem. I think it's important to continue to talk about it and to continue to call it what it is, which are human rights violations. And I don't think that the fact that there's not a really good remedy for that means that we shouldn't frame it that way. But I don't think that's how it's going to change. And I think it all really ties into the policy, the prevention through deterrence policy. Why is the Border Patrol so interested in undermining humanitarian work? It's because that policy is not effective if the journey is not mortally dangerous. They actually, in their own Border Patrol strategic plan document, use the phrase mortal peril to describe what they are intentionally creating. So they're very invested in that. I think that policy is going to have to change from within, and it's going to come from leadership, executive branch leadership, and pressure from elected officials to change that policy. So we, as people who care about this issue, I think one of the best ways we can contribute to making that eventually happen is to continue to talk about it and to make it a known and visible problem. Continue to insist that it is a human rights violation. Do what Tony and Colibri do, which is identifying individual people as individual people and making sure that they're recognized that way. I think a lot of people who are not familiar with these issues at all, when they learn about them, are pretty horrified, but it's not well known outside of the part of the country where this is happening, and even inside this part of the country. And political will, which would be required to make a big policy shift like that, doesn't come to things that are not known publicly. So raising awareness is a really crucial task here.
If I may, Jason, just kind of piggyback what Amy is saying. You know, we're less than 2 weeks away from the election, and what Amy just said is so true. That if you know a little bit about our system of government that we have, you know, we have 3 branches, and Congress, you know, has authority to draft policy dealing with immigration. I mean, the executives, you know, through executive orders will also time to time will chime in. The Supreme Court, as you know, also will interpret cases. And so the point here is that we're less than 2 weeks away, and it makes a big difference. Who controls Congress, the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court? More than ever right now, I think we need to make sure we elect individuals who really are concerned and inform is, to me, is the key. Inform. A lot of time, you know, we make decisions because we don't have enough information. Inform that understand the issue. That's where we come in. Amy said, make sure, just bring the facts to bear to the table so they can make policies that address this injustice. So it's right now is a timing is perfect. We have a saying here: the elections have consequences, and they do. They do, and if anything that I guess I can share is that one of the biggest lessons in life for me has been that decisions are not made in, you know, the vacuum. You know, decisions are made by men and women and those systems, and that's one I think I always try to convey to people, that, you know, people complain about the system that we have, and they don't make the correlation that it makes a difference who isn't holding that office. Whereas the county commissioner, whereas a school board, whereas a Congress or Supreme Court or the White House, makes a big difference who is at that office.
So we've got some questions here from viewers. Are either of you involved in any work or know people who are involved in work around the reunification of children with their parents, especially in light of the report this week about the 500 plus minors? I think it was 546 kids who have still not been reunited with their family members.
I can speak briefly to that. I saw the headline today: 545 children that still had not been found. You know, this is a tragedy, I think. All I can tell you from my end is about 3 weeks ago, the mayor of Phoenix and other consuls in Mexico, Guatemala, and I were on a conversation with the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, because we found out that we're holding children, minors, at hotels, even here in Phoenix. I don't know in Tucson, but throughout the U.S. And the mayor of Phoenix took a very bold decision and brought to the DHS to stop that practice, because again, they were denying due process. You know, instead of children going before a judge to look at the case based on the merits, they were really put in hotels, were caretakers who we don't know who they are, and then they're quickly deported. So thanks to the action of the mayor of Phoenix, I know, and we also, or diplomat, were able to, at least Phoenix, the hotel and motel association agreed that they were not going to rent basically hotels, you know, to allow the DHS to use their hotels to hold minors. But it's very complex. I got a call today, just to that point, Jason, someone who read the article in the New York Times was asking me how she could get involved and help take care of those children. And because of my experience as a diplomat, I know well that it's complex. You cannot, what's supposed to happen is those children are supposed to go to a government-approved shelters. You know, there's an office called the ORR, Office of Refugee and Resettlement. They contract with shelters throughout the U.S., so they would not release those children to even to family members. Once they are in their system, they're supposed to be released to those shelters, and they're very bureaucratic. Really, like this lady today, she was begging. You know, she thought, I have a house, I can take 2 or 3 children. And I know there's people like that who want to do that, but unfortunately, because of the way the system works, that cannot be done. So it's a tragedy, and you know, that's happening even now. 500 plus children, you know, 45 that were under 6 years of age. You know, these are tiny children who haven't seen their mom for more than 6 months, or their dad.
And to the extent that the question is also about more specifically those identified separated families and whether we're involved in those particular cases. The short answer is no. At least I'm not, and I don't think that Colibri is. Tony can correct me. If the parents, had considered their children to be missing and made a report, maybe it would go that way. But we work in the spaces that we work in terms of trying to reunify those families. The ACLU is working really hard on that, and they are the ones with the expertise and the relationships and in that area who are able to be doing that very specific work right now. So I think what we're able to do is support them, not just financially, but emotionally and publicly, and continue to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people don't really understand about detention is that, right, so much of it is run by private corporations that have very little oversight, and so there's all these things that are happening behind the scenes that we just don't have access to as researchers, as lawyers, as CEOs of nonprofits. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening that you hear about long after the fact, or after someone has already come through the system, and so there's a lot more happening beyond just these kids. I mean, all the COVID stuff that we hear about when someone calls from detention and says, I'm sick, no one here is using masks, it's running through these facilities, and then that person gets deported back to Honduras or some other place, sick, gets sent back to a community that doesn't have a lot of health infrastructure. All these things are happening, and there's just it's so hard to even know what's going on, much less how to stop this stuff or how to help, which is one of the biggest issues I think for working with undocumented communities, is that the system is in place so that they are marginalized and rendered kind of voiceless, and so it becomes really difficult to learn and to help because of the way that this whole policy is put together, the whole system. We're getting kind of close on time here. I'm going to ask Tony one specific question from a viewer here about Colibri, and then I have a kind of bigger picture question for both of you. So Tony, a question from one of our viewers is, how long do families have to wait for DNA forensic results? Yeah, so what's the waiting period, and why?
It depends. So I mentioned a lot of times, they'll find bodies, a full body, the baby just died the day before or 2 days before. And a lot of times we have a good DNA, good evidence. We also have a lot of family members, close, family members. In those cases, it'll take less time. But if you want to give you a number, it will be an average of 3 to 4 months by the time we do in a good case like that, where we have good DNA from family members and we have a full body. A lot of times we don't. Like I said, we have a skull, we have a leg, we have bones. That's a more complex and more not only expensive but a more convoluted process to do a DNA analysis on bones. So that will take longer. But I can tell you, we have found remains, they've been missing for more than 6 years, 5-6 years, which is a long time to be waiting for different reasons. So in a good case, 3 to 4 months, but it's going to take a lot longer for different reasons. We're dealing with people in different countries. It's this whole process to get a DNA mail. We can mail a DNA sample, send to the lab. So it takes some time. And that's what I am, my new role, I'm committed to reduce that time. Families have been suffering long enough, for months, for years. And this started very high on my list, on my forehead, to do anything we can to get resources so we can expedite the process. I mentioned earlier, if we have the DNA sample, we can send it tomorrow to Virginia, to the lab, and get a response sooner. So we're very conscious of that. They have suffered long enough.
Okay, this is my kind of last big question for both of you. I'll start with Amy, and this is from one of our viewers. In your opinion, what does comprehensive reform look like? And from a human rights standpoint, where can real change start?
Those are actually two very different questions, I think. Um, Comprehensive reform, that's a really hard thing to answer. I think there are a lot of ways it could change. There are a lot of pieces of the puzzle that need to change, and they don't automatically go together. It's not like, we could just create this entire framework and change everything all at once. I think it's unlikely to happen that way. I think the two things that jump to mind as places where real change can start would be getting the Border Patrol to revoke this policy, this prevention through deterrence policy. And, that's not a law that Congress made. That's an agency policy that's controlled by the chief of the Border Patrol, whose boss is the commissioner or the Customs and Border Patrol, and then they report to the Homeland Security Secretary, who's appointed by the president. So this goes through a channel like that, not a channel like your representative from your town who goes to Washington votes on it. But I think that changing that policy to the extent that we're able to do that by shining light on it and by making it a political problem for the executive branch would go a long way. And I think the thing that sort of goes hand in hand with that is what we've been seeing in the last few years with asylum policies. So those are policies and laws that are designed to make it so that someone who really is in danger is able to come here and seek safety. And if that is an available option and it's safe and it's fair and it's humane, we might see less of the kind of desperate behavior that we see. The current administration has restricted the availability of asylum so greatly, first just as part of its immigration policies, and then with the rise of COVID, even more, that we basically we're not considering asylum applications much at all. And I think that could be reversed relatively easily with the will to do it. The laws are already there. The current administration just isn't following them. So those are the areas where I would begin, I think.
Quick question for Amy. Do you think that could there be an executive order to stop the use of prevention through deterrence? Would that be a possibility?
I wouldn't call it an impossibility. I think that the way, I mean, it's not a terribly specific set of procedures. It's a sort of governing policy that's part of the strategic plan. So maybe, but if we have a president with the will to change that, they can appoint a Secretary of Homeland Security who's going to change that. And I think that it would more easily happen that way than through an executive order.
And then, Tony, for you, last question. From a human rights standpoint, where do you think real change can start?
I think understanding, we hear that all the time, this country was built by immigrants. We don't have to spend a lot of time to see that it's true. It's built by immigrants from all over the world. And that's what makes the US one of the very unique countries in the world. So we need to go back to that. That's where the uniqueness and our wealth come from that diversity that came in the 20s and before that. So we need to start changing attitudes and embrace that and look at individuals as human beings. Every case, working in this for many years now, it's such a unique opportunity to learn and about this history and story of this men and women trying to seek for a better life, and they have talent. You know, we need to start from a not from a deficit point of view. But this people have a lot of talent. They have a lot of good work ethic, good energy. It could contribute to this world, to society, and you know, I kind of piggyback to the question you asked Jamie. I mean, Amy. You know, no one is advocating for open borders. People ask me that sometimes, a few times. Of course not. Every country has a right to protect their borders. But my point is, like Amy mentioned, this is a very convoluted, very complex issue that if we had the willpower, you know, 435 members in the House and 100 in the Senate to really look at this and come up, we know it's not easy. I know that. I worked in this for many years. It's very complex. It requires complex solutions. You know, there are so many issues, the asylum, the domestic violence cases, the TPS. I personally work with TPS, temporary protection status for Hondurans for many years. A lot of countries have that, you know, so temporary. So there are many layers. But the point is that if we have the willpower, if we elect the right men and women to those positions, if they have the willpower, we will find a solution. You know, people keep saying, "Do it the right way. Do it the right way." What is the right way? It's not that easy. It's complex. So let's elect leaders who will take a broad view and humane view to find real solutions. You know, so we don't just hide this under the carpet, like you say. You know, it's the big elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. And I hope maybe after this election we'll have a new Congress, a new Supreme Court, a new executive, and that will really, you know, without being partisan, just being practical and humane and look at this with an open eye, mind and fresh minds to find real solutions to this complex issue of immigration. Unfortunately, we're going to continue doing what we're doing. Like I said, the numbers keep going up for Ask Colibri, and we'll continue doing our work. I said at the interview to you, Amy and Jason, I hope in a few years we don't have to be doing this work. Remember, I said that. Because there are no more deaths at the border. Wouldn't be nice. We can do something else. I can find something else to do. So let's hope for that. We can get to the point sooner rather than later.
Thank you both so much. It's always a real pleasure. I'm so sorry that we cannot do this together in Arizona, but I hope that that will happen soon. Um, Before we go, I just want to say a couple things. One, if you're interested in learning about Amy's work or the work of Colibri, we will have links to their websites. You can learn about Amy's legal practice. You can learn about what Colibri is doing in Arizona, how to support their work, or if you are looking for legal advice, which I am periodically, not related to immigration but other things. So thankfully, I've got Amy on speed dial. But we'll put that up so if people are interested, they can learn more. You can always donate money to organizations like Colibri to help their cause. And last but not least, we're gonna end with a project that the Undocumented Migration Project is currently involved with that relates to all the issues that we've just been speaking about, and that is raising awareness about migrant death in Arizona. And so what we are doing at the moment is it's called a moment of global remembrance, where we are looking for over 3,200 volunteers from around the world to spend 30 seconds making an audio or video recording of themselves reading out the names of those who have died in the Arizona desert as a way to raise awareness and also as a way to stand in solidarity and memorialize those lost lives. So I'm going to let Nicole is going to share her screen in a second here and play this very short video. And I just want to thank once again Tony and Amy for the incredible work that they do every day, and also for giving us their time today. So thank you both so much.
My pleasure.
Cástulo Salazar Ontiveros,
Francisco de Jesús Méndez Álvarez,
Juan Gabriel García Gallegos,
Rafael Cavillo Núñez.
Unidentified.
Juan de Jesús Rivera Cota,
Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you after November 3rd, and we'll hope for the best. Take care.
Bye.